consultancy firm called Solita. And I've been with Solita for a year and a half, and prior to that I was at IBM for 10 years, and I spent 5 years of those being the IBM spokesperson for AI in Sweden. So I've been out and about quite a bit trying to make sense out of. And so the focus today, I guess, is around the business value, and the chosen topic is basically out of the conversation I had with Adrian and another, I forget his name now, apologies, but anyway, around AI business consultancy. So I was thinking, okay, let's do a non-technical sort of business approach into this, and the idea is to sort of give you some tools how to approach business value and the possibilities and risks relating to that as it concerns AI. So next slide, please. So when we talk about AI, I like to frame my thinking along the lines of the Gartner hype cycle, because it makes it possible for me to dig into the very vast topic that AI is. And basically the idea of the hype cycle is to have some sort of trigger, next slide, or ping, Adrian, to kick off a set of expectations relating to that technology trigger. And when it comes to AI, to a fair extent, the field sort of got kicked off by Alan Turing's seminal paper in the 50s, in which he asked that question, can machines think? And today, ping, next click, we have this great expectations on what AI can do. However, every now and then there will be like a disappointment around what AI can bring to the table, and then we will end up in this trough of disillusionment. So if you flip to the next slide, when we are in these AI winters, there will be different kinds of books written. And in the 70s, we were in one of those winters, and people wrote, like Dreyfus wrote books like What Computers Can't Do, and they put a stake in the ground saying that there's a limit to what artificial intelligence can do. And then there's sort of a reset of the expectations, and then we continue into the future again. And if you flip to the next slide, what always seemed to happen is that there will be some sort of new breakthrough relating to the field, some technological breakthrough or some clever application of something previously existing that will reset the expectations again. And we will think, well, maybe we can actually do a lot of different things with AI. And off we go again on this march towards inflated expectations. But the whole field around generative AI is, of course, the cutting edge today and very interesting in and all by itself. Next slide. We talk about artificial intelligence quite a bit, and there's been a backlash on the term as well. And now people try to stay away from it a little bit, I guess. But it's just such a convenient term that you always end up trying to talk about AI instead and broaden it out and be bigger than machine learning, for instance, or ML or DL or something like that. But nevertheless, there is still no consensus around the actual definition of what artificial intelligence really is. And there was an interesting article written a couple of years ago where Pei Wang spent almost 30 pages just trying to define the concept. And if you flip to the next slide, you will see this again and again. So there was a very recent study out of the Norwegian University of Technology and Sciences called Artificial Intelligence and Business Value, a literary review. And I will return to this throughout the talk. And they also call attention to the fact that there are a bunch of different definitions of artificial intelligence. And before we agree on what we're talking about, it's difficult to sort of think about the business value or the risks. So anyway, next slide, please. So there's this proliferation of different words that we tend to sort of toss into the bag when we want to define artificial intelligence. Now, I've made it very simple for myself. When I'm out talking, I talk about artificial intelligence in a much more inclusive sense. So if you flip to the next slide, I will basically define it as intelligence without biology. And that's my own definition, my home-cooked definition of artificial intelligence. I like it. A lot of people don't, because they say, well, it's too broad, and also what is intelligence anyway? You're just trying to get out of the fix, which is sort of true. But if you flip to the next slide, I will then view artificial intelligence as anything that is intelligent in my view and non-biological. So the calculator application or the calculus to me is an artificial intelligence. So if you can multiply or process or compute very complex numbers in a very quick manner, very accurately, if I met a person with those skills, I would think of that person as an intelligent person. But there are, of course, different levels to intelligence, and not everybody is perhaps at the level of Albert Einstein or who have you, right? But still, there's an element of intelligence in just being able to compute. So if you flip to the next slide, there was this very interesting case in the US courts in the 60s, I guess, or the 70s maybe, about obscenity. And there was I forget the details of it, but there was a moment in that trial where the justice had to define hardcore pornography, basically. What is it? What is obscenity? And the judge famously said, click, I know it when I see it. So he shied away from trying to lock it down, but he said, well, I can see obscenity when I see it. I recognize it when I see it. And the same is sort of true of intelligence. Like, we tend to sort of recognize it when we see it, but we're very challenged when we try to define it. But then again, however, there are still certain aspects that I myself, for instance, would look for when I think about intelligence. So if you flip to the next slide, I would look for 4 things relating to something in order for me to start thinking about it in terms of intelligence. One is, I want a level of understanding. And by that, I mean, I want some sort of sensitivity towards context. So if you think of the calculator, those math rules that it can compute are always the same, regardless of context. 2 + 2 doesn't change over the weekend. I also want some level of reasoning. I want to be able to offset or balance off different aspects of a problem. It's not just about finding the truth, but maybe something that doesn't have a truth, but has some sort of complexity to it. So I want the system to be able to reason. And then thirdly, I'm looking for the system to improve over time. So as it is executed, it should improve. So there needs to be an element of learning. If there is no learning, I'm not willing to grant it sort of intelligence status. And then finally, when we talk about human interaction or human and machine interaction, there certainly needs to be some ease, some pleasantness to the interaction for me to be able to think of it in terms of intelligence. So if I meet some square, a person who's very sort of, I won't view that person as socially intelligent, as somebody who can listen in and sort of adjust the tone of the voice or the topic being discussed at the dinner table according to the audience. So if you have these 4 things, I'm thinking that you're in sort of the presence of intelligence, even though we haven't locked it down. So next slide, please. So now that we have a sort of understanding of what intelligence is, then if Adrian flips us to the next slide, then you can ask yourself, what can artificial intelligence do? And this is where we come into the sort of business consultancy of artificial intelligence. And the way I like to think of it, again, I try to sort of simplify things, box them in, and create tools out of aspects or viewpoints for me to use in my consultancy. So when I think about what AI can do, I think about 4 things. I think about the first thing, optimize. You can put artificial intelligence to work to optimize something. And yes, you can certainly have it recognize something. So you can parse large sets of data. So if you flip to the next, you see recognize. So whatever regularities you have in the data set, you can extract those.
Kan du hjälpa mig?
Ja, om en liten stund. Jag ska bara jobba klart här. And then you can, thirdly, you can automate something. You can automate something. So if you are willing and trusting, you can actually have a lot of automation going. And this can be on the factory floor in terms of physical robots, but also in process optimization, for instance. And then fourthly, or finally, you can use artificial intelligence to amplify, augment, or generate something. So you can extend the existing sphere set of capability. Okay, try to flip to the next slide and we'll see. But basically, this will give you an overview. And this will, sorry, if you flip back, this overview that the Norwegian guys put together is pretty good in terms of if you want to think about where to look for your entry point in terms of what AI can provide in terms of value, what are the areas where it can have impact. I would certainly agree with these first and second order effects. So we will come back to this, I guess, in a little while. But basically, so this is what artificial intelligence can do. Now, if you flip then, sorry for being a bit incoherent here. Yes, if you're here, what can artificial intelligence actually be used for? And I will show you a couple of things that came out of a very recent survey that the Finnish data science hub Silo AI put together and published just recently. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. They put out this yearly or annual state of AI report, which is super well researched and put together, and I highly recommend it. And I'll provide you the links as well to it, and I recommend you reading it. And I will show you a couple of things out of that survey that they published. And one is the AI adoption by industry. Now, this is a global view. So the survey respondents in this particular graph is not restricted to the Nordics. But in here, you will see something that you perhaps will also agree with if you've been out and about for a bit, that the public sector, education, healthcare, are still either not using AI very much or they are evaluating it. So for these players or actors, AI hasn't really reached big impact in production yet. If you contrast then that to, say, retail or financial services, you will see there's a lot of AI in production, although they are still evaluating and to some extent not using it. But anyway, you will see that to me, then this sort of shows that AI will be used in data-rich environments that are less complex in terms of regulatory aspects. So that, I think, is a general truism across. And if you then flip to the next slide, you will see that when they asked about the obstacles in the survey last year, it was basically what was hindering greater use or usage was basically lack of money and time, the actual focus and bandwidth of investing in something that is perhaps a futuristic revenue stream. The data aspect and the challenges around data was called out. And then the presence of legacy, basically. Those were the three things that in 2021 were called out as obstacles for using AI. Now, if you flip to the next slide, the question was asked slightly differently, and it was about scaling, or what the challenges are in terms of scaling AI. And here we will see something interesting. Not only will the lack of data also be called out, and also insufficient investments, but here, in terms of scaling, they are more hindered by the lack of talent, which is, again, that's interesting if you're an AI business consultant or skilled in the field in any shape or form. But also, if you look at the lack of shared practices related to data, scores very high. And this is why I think the ML ops domain is taking off now. And there's a lot of talk about that, because people have done the POC AI stuff for a bit now, and now they have found out where it will work for them, but they are now in the process of getting to overcome challenges relating to large-scale operations of AI. So the ML ops domain is certainly something worth keeping an eye on and acquaint yourself with. Also, I found it very interesting that they call out lack of use cases. That to me is a bit surprising, because I would think that if you've understood the first things around what AI is and what it can do, it should be able for you to find a lot of use cases in your business. So it's surprising to me that a lot of people find the actual lack of use cases being what hinders scaling. Anyway, onwards then to the next slide. So how is it used in terms of current technologies or offerings? So most companies that use AI today, and now we're in the Nordics, do so as part of a product or a service. That's the vast majority. So you can think of this as, the voice in your speaker phone, or the pricing optimization, or the search pricing mechanisms for micromobility or something like that. The AI element figures as a part of a product or a service. And then the other things that are less prominent is part of production, which I thought was going to be higher, but regardless. And then you have the back office functions, 23%. I thought also this was lower than I had expected. But then again, I mean, the RPA thing is certainly something that is being addressed now, but we'll see. And then, of course, there's a reason why retail is using it quite a bit in business to consumer services, because of the impact it can have on customer care and customer experience and case handling. All right, moving on. Now, if you then think of the value that people perceive in terms of what AI can bring to the table, I guess this is not then that surprising if you think about the previous slide. But basically, where people do see value of implementing AI or applying AI is in the is in the space of improving features and usability for product and services, and also the actual quality of the product and services themselves. And then you have, the optimization of resources. Again, AI is good, or a lot of the technologies that go into that box are good at figuring out improvements to existing ways of doing things if you have enough data for it to parse. So usually, if you think about a process, any process, either a manufacturing process or a back office process, it's very rare for clients to feel that they are at the index, that they're doing the process at the optimum. So usually, when you bring in more sophisticated technology, you can hit that optimum slightly better. All right, moving on. Oh yes, okay. So this is then a breakdown also then of when we talk about AI, a lot of things get piled into it. But this is a way of showing what are the technologies or techniques in that larger box that people are actually using. And then I guess no surprise here, you see that machine learning is the vastly most used technology out there. Although I was surprised to find deep learning being so widely used. I wonder if that is skewed in the respondents' data or not. But anyway, that was impressive. Explainable AI, there is certainly a focus on being able to explain what your AI is doing, but it's perhaps not that easy at times. And then you will see there's a large adoption of natural language processing or NLP stuff, which I think speaks to also the breakthroughs related to GPT-3 and the whole generative AI domain. And then there's a lot of computer vision, and I think these are also some of the things that we tend to be exposed to or identify as sort of regular people living 2022 in an urban environment, because this is all over the place in terms of scanning QR codes or parking your scooter or having payment services using your Face ID on your iPhone or what have you. Okay, moving on. Yes, this I found quite interesting as well. The compute, where does it occur? Predominantly in on-premise still, or in some sort of private cloud. But then there's actually quite a large percentage of people doing AI compute on public cloud externally. And then there is smaller groups of people actually combining cloud and edge or pushing AI out on the edge. I think this is not relevant for everybody. I think the edge doesn't really mean too much in certain business contexts. But if you think about it in terms of a point of sale or a manufacturing floor, then the edge is, of course, very interesting. Okay, moving on. So the risks then. There was an article, click, just recently published in Vice, which I thought summed things up pretty nicely. And of course, Vice is not perhaps your peer-reviewed science journal, but still it's interesting where you have a headline going, scientists increasingly can't explain how AI works, and that AI researchers are warning developers to focus more on how and why a system produces certain results than the fact that the system can accurately and rapidly produce them. And then, so that's a worthwhile read for sure. But basically, why I think this is at the heart of the risks associating to AI is basically what is shown on the next slide, Adrian. So a couple of years ago, Apple put out this Apple Card. And I don't know if you saw what happened or read about it, but basically it turned out that the algorithm used for assessing credit credentials or credibility was skewed, so men fared better than women, and so it was a biased algorithm scoring it in a skewed way. But and that's, of course, I mean, that can happen. But the interesting thing was this: if you click on one of the quotes out of that article, was that the response from Apple just added confusion and suspicion. No one from the company seemed able to describe how the algorithm even worked, let alone justify its output. So if you have, I mean, think of it. If you have AI dudes over at Apple and they launch this payment service and they themselves don't really know how it works, I mean, if Apple guys can't figure this out, who are we then to do it? I mean, it's fascinating to me. And they got basically investigated, and the whole financial regulatory system came in. And then I think they eventually they did sort of figure out how it worked. But it was just interesting at that time when that got exposed, and people wanted a quick understanding of why is this so. They couldn't answer. So the black box of AI, I think, is still very valid. Now, the risks with this is, if you think about what AI can do, the scaling, the augmentation, the extending, the automation, the optimization, once you start letting these things loose and you trust them, there are, of course, risks of abuse or misuse, and weird things will come out of it. So if you flip to the next slide, it's only when you do, oh yes, sorry, yeah, to frame it before we get into those risks. I think Elon Musk, when he was at Joe Rogan, summarized the overall problem with AI very nicely when he said, in response to Joe Rogan's ask about artificial general intelligence, the future AI thing, whether it was going to be evil or bad. And Elon Musk basically said, no, it's not necessarily bad. It's just outside of human control. And I think this is so very poignant. This is just perfect because, I mean, yes, now he's talking about the artificial general intelligence, but we can adopt the same thinking to whatever automated decision system we put out into production that we trust with the day-to-day operations of our lives or business. If we can't understand them, we can control them, and if we can control them, we can't have them behave in a way that is good for us, and then you will end up in trouble. So if you go to the next couple of slides, we can just run through this. You will have difficult situations where the decision needs to be made how to behave, and you can flip to the next slide. You will have these skewed biases in various systems where you try to benefit from the capabilities that AI bring to the table, but eventually you end up not being able to use them. And then the next slide. So you will have, Google apologizing after Vision AI produce racist results. And you can, of course, make the case that the AI itself can't be racist. It's a technology. But still, the problems and the behavioralistic aspects of it are the same. So that leads us, I guess, to the wrap up. If you flip to the next slide, there are certainly things that are problematic because they're not thought through or understood or complex. Because of, it's difficult to put these in place where you have such great data sets and such great compute. But also you may risk ending up in trouble even if you're thinking that you're going to do something great. So this Sanas guys in San Francisco, they basically have a voice converter service where they convert spoken language into a pleasantly white sounding American standard English. So the idea is then to facilitate communication over the phone. If everybody just speaks the Queen's English or the Boston American or what have you, then communication will smoothly flow, and everybody will win. Of course, that may be sort of true, but it will come at a cost where we codify a bias against dialects that the tech developers of the service don't agree with necessarily, and that can, of course, result in a big problem down the road. This is not a hack. This is not a breach. This is not a non-thought-through problem. This is a thought-through service with a specific business value, and it is problematic still. So at the end, then, to wrap up, if you flip to the next slide, I like to think about the business value of artificial intelligence along the lines of Professor Chipola's behavioristic view of stupidity, because I think this is so great, and I think it's such a great framework to think about where to apply artificial intelligence and how to think about your own sort of AI consultancy work. So Chipola stood up this square and he said, if you behave in a way that is beneficial to you and beneficial to others, you are behaving in an intelligent way. But if you are behaving in a way that causes damages to yourself and damages to others, you're behaving in a stupid way. And then he said, if you are behaving in a way that benefits yourself at the expense of others, you're a bandit, you're an asshole. Or if you benefit, if you work in a way, if you behave in a way that occur losses to you but benefit to others, then you're helpless. And of course, nobody sits squarely in one of these boxes, but I think the framework is good. So if you think of where to put in artificial intelligence in the organization, where to create that value, you can think about the behavioral benefits and how that is spread out, and that will give you a very good, healthy, sound way of approaching providing AI business services. And because at the end of the day, if you flip to the next slide, which is the last, I guess, I agree with H.G. Wells. I do think that history is becoming more and more a race between education and catastrophe. I think that we need more intelligence. I think we need more education, and I think we need less stupidity. And the only way out of this is by education. So my final slide then, I guess, is educate yourself by reading at least these things. There's of course a bunch of things to take part of if you want to educate yourself. But I think this is a good little list, and these are some of the things I made use of for this presentation. And then final slide is basically, if you have questions that we can't answer at the remaining of the session, you are happy to reach out to me either across my email, patrickcouch@solita.se, or over at LinkedIn. So with that, I guess I wrap up.
Thank you, Patrick. So
Thank
now
you.
we move on to the Q&A session. Is there anyone who have questions to Patrick? You can write in the chat or you can unmute yourself. For me, it was really a super impressive session. I really like the part that you said, for scaling up, lack of the talent and lack of the use cases in the data. That was a little bit surprising. So it was super impressive.
Yeah, and I like I said, I recommend reading that entire Silo AI's Nordic State of the AI report, because it is good. And in terms of that question regarding the slides, I'm fine with sharing slides in PDF format. So just make use of the recording or the slides as you see.
Absolutely. After the session, we will share in the LinkedIn. Thank you. Now we have a question from Tab.
Hi. Yeah, that stupidity thing. That's great. Yeah, I'm going to use that.
Yeah, by all means.
But no, my question is around when you're going through the Silo report, there was, I think, on the reasons why people don't or are not kind of getting into or at least exploring AI was, I mean, data was a very large one. And I wondered if you have any thoughts on, I don't know, I guess the feasibility of synthetic data playing a role more in democratization or whatever buzzword is. Yeah.
I think that synthetic data will become decisive or vital. I think crucial and integral to everything we do. I think that is the way to get out of some of the problems, not all of them, but for sure. And I think I'm seeing more and more really clever ways of creating those synthetic data sets in a way that actually make them provide value. So I do think so. I think you know, like the edge or like certain other technologies, they seem slower in manifesting than you would want and perhaps expect, given the potential if they do get it right. But I do think we're seeing the sort of the arrival of synthetic data onto the scene by now. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
We have one more from the chat. What is the most successful implementation of AI that you know of? From Krille.
Well, I think the most successful would perhaps be, you know, the Face ID of iPhone. I mean, everybody just loves that, and it seems inconceivable to not have it. So, and also I think Face ID across any use case or any domain, I think it's more or less the most successful. I mean, yes, it's fun these voice assistants and the speech to text conversion or the voice control things, but they are still a bit clunky. But the Face ID capability is spot on. It's great and problematic, of course, but still, you know, I wouldn't want to live without it, I guess. Maybe. do you think companies could do with non-technical help as a first step towards the application? I think they should. I think certainly they should not lead by technology. They should lead by inspiration and vision. So if you're running a business, you should ask yourself, why are you running the business? What is it that you want to achieve? And all these traditional things about entrepreneurial mindsets. I think that's where you should start, and then start, mapping out what it is that you want to achieve, and then you go and try and figure out if it's technologically possible, or if it makes sense financially to actually go for it. I mean, you may have an idea that is technically feasible, but it doesn't make any sense. I guess bias, patterns, generalization. Well, yes. Well, I guess bias. Yes. Well, so I guess bias is really not in the data sets. Bias is really in the way we approach the data sets. The data sets aren't biased. Their sourcing may be, or their manipulation may be, but bias comes in as we interact with them. And certainly, I totally agree that generalization is part and parcel of what it means to be human, because we stereotype everything, because it makes it possible for us to navigate the world. And if we are encountering something unknown, we'd rather just label it generally, like, oh, this is probably this, and then we work with that sort of assumption in play until we get disproven. So I think it serves a purpose, but we should be aware of the generalizations that we sort of fall into. So all the biases are just there, but the first thing to do is just become acquainted with them or by them, like to know of them and know how you tend to sort of fall into those yourselves.
Okay, now we have a question from Wesley.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, first of all, thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting, very insightful. And my question is, based on your experience on the market, how do you see the way that companies are dealing with the problems related, for example, to the lack of data or the explainability of the AI system? How do you see companies are trying to deal with those issues? Thank you.
Well, so in terms of data, I think there are certain situations where you do have a lack of data. You don't have enough of whatever it is that you need in order to be able to train the model. In other instances, you may have too much of data and you have a hard time processing it and figuring out what data sets out of all those parameters do you actually need. So that's a challenge of a problem of abundance, if you will. But I think the way companies are addressing it is basically either they try to educate themselves around what type of data sets do they need in order to successfully address a use case that they think they want to stand up, and then they try to generate that data in production or capture that data as it is being produced. That is one way they're trying to do it. The other one is, of course, synthetic data, to the extent that they are exploring that, but that I still think is a bit early days. And then the third way that people are dealing with the lack of data is just to wait and not do anything and say, well, I'm sorry, we can't do anything because we don't have the data, and so I'm so sad. But and that may be the best course of action also at times. But I think those would be the three ways.
Thank you. Is there any questions in the chat that we don't see from our screens, but Adrian?
Yes, we do have a new question from Fredrik.
This will be the last question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, okay, thanks for sharing these thoughts about bias. It sounds like bias could be removed thanks to enough intelligence. Could that be translated into providing the models with enough data? Could be the way to remove undesired bias.
Yes, to some extent that is exactly right. So you want to sort of fight fire with fire in this case, and have more data offset less data, or have tried to think about the data that you collected. But also I think there are now some tools at least out there to help you monitor model drift in production, for instance, or during training, how to mitigate if you're skewing something by your selection of parameters or what have you. So you can also make use of some of these AI technologies to sort of help offset some of that risk.
Awesome, thank you.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And with 2 minutes to go, we'll have some last words from us, and no, other way.
Sure.
Yeah. So now we don't really have time for some takeaways, but if you have some, please share them in the chat. And we will go on to next. So please, if you're new here, please follow us on LinkedIn. You can also watch our YouTube channel where we upload previous events. And we also have an Instagram account, which isn't that active at this point, but we're trying to get it up. But please follow us on LinkedIn to start discussions and have more info about the upcoming events. And yeah,
Please connect with us, connect with participants, connect with Patrick. So thank you so much today, Patrick, and everyone who participated. And thank you. Thank you. And have a wonderful day.
All right, excellent. I'm super happy that this worked out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
yeah, that was great.
It was great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.